Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Resilinc's webinar about using AI and predictive analytics for hurricane preparedness. My name is Melissa Geringer. I oversee corporate communications for Resilinc, and I'll be serving as moderator for today's presentation. Some quick housekeeping to start. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please use the question tab to send in your questions, and we'll do our best to cover them today or follow up with you after. And also please know we'll be recording the webinar and making it available to you after the broadcast. And with that, let's talk about the agenda. We're first going to talk through trends and data related to hurricane season and provide some best practices and case studies on how to prepare for extreme weather events. Following that, we'll be walking you through some of our product offerings related to extreme weather, including our predictive PO on-time delivery solution and our hurricane simulator. And again, we'll wrap it up with Q&A. Please use the question tab to send in those questions. And now I'd like to introduce our two speakers today, Sumit Vakil and Sandeep Ramachandran. Sumit is Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Resilinc. As CPO, Sumit is responsible for Resilinc's product and technology vision, direction, and delivery. Sumit has 25 years of experience bringing innovative technologies to market and has served in leadership roles in product management and engineering at successful startups as well as Fortune 500 companies such as Brocade and Cisco. And joining him is Resilinc's Director of Product, Sandeep Ramachandran. Sandeep has handled multiple roles within the supply chain risk domain, such as advisory, product marketing, and product development. Currently, he heads up Resilinc's product management in the US region. A warm welcome to you both. And again, to our audience, thanks for dialing in today. Sumit, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Let me start by talking about last year's hurricane season. By the way, when we say hurricanes, let's keep in mind that we are also including typhoons and cyclones. Those are just different names for the same kind of a storm pattern, but in a different part of the world. In the US alone, we had $37 billion in damages from last year's hurricane season. This is just the US alone. If you look at the worldwide map of other hurricanes and typhoons that happened last year, what you will see is that one, there were several large storms that impacted regions worldwide, and two, what you will see is that the number of sites and parts that were impacted in these various regions were huge. For example, you'll see Typhoon Laura, Hurricane Laura and in the US here, and just look at the the number of sites there. 4,000 sites, over 4,000 sites in the region of impact, over 3,000 parts in the region of Hurricane Laura. Moving over to Southeast Asia, look at the Category 5 Typhoon Goni that made landfall around the Philippines. 550 sites in the region of impact, 710 parts. Typhoon Haishen in South Korea, over 6,600 sites, over 2,000 parts in the region of impact. With each one of these, another thing to notice, the TTR, which is time to recovery, average time to recovery, 24 weeks, 21 weeks, 31 weeks. What this really tells us is that the impact from hurricanes is massive. The number of sites, parts it can each hurricane or typhoon can impact is big, and the duration of the disruption that it can cause to a supply chain is very lengthy. 24 weeks, 1 week, 36, 31 weeks. That's almost half a year. If you go to the next slide. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the hurricane season is getting longer. The number of high intensity or major hurricanes are increasing. The number of hurricane days when hurricanes are happening is increasing. And the number of days that the major hurricanes happen is increasing. So all in all, the hurricane season is getting longer. Hurricanes are getting more powerful, and more powerful hurricanes are happening more often. Just look at the comparison. The first column there, the middle column there, are the averages from NOAA. for the period 1991 to 2021. And the column on the right is the CSU forecast for this year. And this is very fresh from June 3, right? So again, you can see how hurricane seasons are getting longer and hurricanes are getting stronger. And so there is a major imperative for every supply chain to prepare for hurricane season and to make sure that the supply chains are hardened against hurricanes, typhoons, etc. What have we seen that has worked in the past? Here are some of the findings that that we have seen have helped our customer base cope better with hurricane season, with fewer disruptions, with lesser impact to their supply chains. Customers who have successfully navigated hurricane season have mapped their supply chains to the component level. What does this mean? This means they have gone to their suppliers and asked them to provide information about where their parts and materials are coming from, whether these are factory locations or warehouses, distribution centers, any other location that touches the parts or materials that are supplied by those suppliers. These companies have quantified the risk that the company has and the companies and their customers have because of the components and raw materials, the supplier sites, their own sites, products, etc. So these say it a different way, these companies have connected the possible impact of hurricanes all the way up to their company revenue goals and their customers. These companies have proactively tried and found critical failure points in their supply chains and proactively tried and address them ahead of time. They have put strategies in place to mitigate high-risk areas. For example, if they have discovered that a supplier does not have personnel trained up to deal with a factory that has a power outage, then they will go pay attention to that and make sure that that supplier rectifies the problem. Successful companies who have successfully tackled hurricane season have put playbooks in place ahead of time. Playbooks are basically processes modeled into a software system. So this way, employees know, the crisis response teams know exactly what to do in case of a hurricane or a typhoon. Not just that, but these companies have taken the time to train their personnel, to train their suppliers' personnel, to execute these playbooks should a disruption occur. And last but not least, these companies pay attention to where the sub-tiers are. This is one of the most important and unfortunately one of the most overlooked parts of supply chains today. Most companies today, if you look at them, have a very robust multi-sourcing strategy. So if they have a sole source part or a single source part or a critical part, they try very hard to find alternate suppliers. In many cases, what could have started as a sole or single source part now has become a multi-source part. So a critical component or raw material is being supplied, let's say, by 3 different suppliers. But unfortunately, what happens in supply chains is even if you go one level deeper into the supply chain, so we're talking about tier 2 now, that same tier 2 supplier might end up supplying multiple of those direct suppliers. So in the example I was providing with a multi-source part coming from 3 different suppliers, that one tier 2 supplier might be supplying to 2 of the direct suppliers. Now, if that tier 2 supplier has a site in the hurricane region and that site goes down, then 2 of the direct suppliers could get impacted. And now all of a sudden, what was before a really strong multi-sourcing strategy has reverted back to a sole / single source problem component. So this is what we call the diamond of death, right? You have a multi-sourcing at your direct supplier level, but at a lower tier 2, tier 3, etc., everything bottlenecks onto one supplier. companies who have identified that and mitigated that successfully have also been able to resist better disruptions from hurricane season. Okay. So how do you go about actually building a robust supply chain like that? If you go to the next slide, please. What you're looking for is a solution that delivers hyper-automation to you and to your supply chain organization. So what is hyper-automation? Let's start there. What you're looking for is a system, a solution that uses the latest in AI and machine learning technologies in big data analysis to provide predictions on what could go wrong, what could be impacted during hurricane season, what will be impacted once a disruption happens, and then provides prescriptive guidance on what to do, what steps to take in order to mitigate the crisis. So let's dwell deeper into hyperautomation itself. So hyper-automated automation solutions will automate the mundane tasks for your staff. So let's take this in the context of hurricane season. If all the mundane tasks were automated, then your crisis response team, your supply chain organization can focus very much on taking action that will reduce the impact of the disruption. Right? For example, they could focus on locking up shipping so they reduce the expedite ship costs. They could focus on locking up inventory so the with the costs associated with spot buys and so on are also controlled. So what kind of hyper automation would help? Right, so again, in the hurricane context, what you're looking for is a solution that will first automatically tell you what the likely impact would be. So it does all the analysis and presents in easy to consume format things like, here are your suppliers, here are their parts, here are their sites, here are your products, here are your customers, your business units, here is the potential revenue impact to you that is likely to happen once this hurricane makes landfall, or that is likely to happen now that this hurricane has landed. That's the first thing that a hyper-automation system would do. It would do all the analysis for you immediately. But let's step back a little bit. How did it actually decide to do this analysis, right? So the hyper-automation system should then actually be on a 24/7 basis, monitoring all worldwide activity in multiple different languages across multiple different media. So let me break that down. As we discussed earlier, we're not just talking about hurricanes, right? We're talking about typhoons, cyclones as well, which happen in the Asian region where we know there's a lot of manufacturing. So automatically, then it is no longer sufficient to deal with English language news only. The hyper-automation system has to be able to process and consume automatically millions of news items in multiple different languages. It also has to be able to consume information from multiple different sources, not just your traditional news sources. What happens with traditional news sources is they will announce hurricanes, yes, but that impact of the hurricane to a very specific region of a city, for example, is not something that comes out in mainstream media. It is something that you have to go to local media for. It is something that you have to go to social media for. For example, at Resilinc, we monitor not just mainstream media, we monitor hundreds and thousands of, tens of thousands of different news outlets, government agencies, and social media, including, believe it or not, TikTok. We might think TikTok is all for consumer stuff, but our solution also monitors it. So that would be one thing that the hyper-automation system has to do. And once it starts doing that, then it is able to pick up hurricanes, pick up impacts, pick up their paths, and it is then able to merge it with the information that has been collected about supply chains and supply chain mapping, sub-tier mapping, to provide a comprehensive analysis of the likely impact of the hurricane to your supply chains. Once this is decided, the hyper-automated system will automatically then go reach out to suppliers and ask them what kind of an impact are they likely to see because of this disruption. It takes all of that information and generates KPIs that are easy to consume and actionable. Let me give you one example of an easy to consume actionable KPI that such a system could produce. So again, at Resilinc, when a disruption happens, the software is automatically able to say, for this particular hurricane, these are your suppliers who are most likely to delay purchase order deliveries. Now, we know that on-time delivery is a key metric that impacts your own order fulfillment metrics. So having that insight, having that prediction that says purchase orders from these suppliers are likely to be delayed by 3 to 6 months can give you some very powerful, immediate, actionable information that you can then act upon using the playbooks that you have configured already in the system. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what a hyper-automated system can deliver to you in terms of making it very easy, very fast for your organization to respond to disruptions. Next slide, please. All right, so how do you go about something like this? Like, what are the components you are looking for in a system? What are the things you need to bring together? So let's start with where you ultimately want to be. Where you ultimately want to be is a platform that will, excuse me, is a platform that will deliver complete total insight into your supplier performance. Okay, it should be able to tell you everything about the supplier that you may care about, all the risks associated with the suppliers, their past performance when it relates to hurricane seasons and so on. Where you start with this is with information, with intelligence about the suppliers. So we're talking about things like multi-tier supply chain mapping, right? Who's your supplier? Who are their suppliers? Who are their suppliers? As deep into the supply chain as you can go, along with the factory locations, the warehousing, distribution, etc., that happens at the various different supply chain tiers. You're also looking at collecting part to site mapping information. So which materials get processed where, warehousing, distribution, manufacturing, testing, assembly, even services for that matter. Then you also want to bring in historical purchase order information, on-time deliveries of purchase orders with your suppliers. You want to bring in the current inventory positions with your suppliers. And you want to bring in the current lead time that your suppliers are predicting. Bring all of that together, add on top of that other information around suppliers' business continuity practices, specifically suppliers' hurricane preparedness practices and processes. And now you have a very powerful data set that is ready for the next part of the system, which is an advanced AI-based system. So an advanced AI-based solution will then bring in real-time news using natural language processing, as we discussed earlier, multiple different languages across the globe, multiple different media outlets. It will combine that outside data, natural language data, with the part site mapping, the deep supplier intelligence data. It will bring all of that together using predictive machine learning models and deep learning neural networks, and ultimately generate a command and control center that will help you quickly and easily take action in case of disruptions related to hurricanes. A system like this will not require your people to do the mundane, as we discussed earlier. Instead, it will deliver hyper automation, so your staff is focused, laser focused on just mitigating the impact of the event. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the significance and the criticality of collecting information from your suppliers ahead of time. As I mentioned earlier, it is very, very important for us to harden supply chains ahead of hurricane season, right? And one of the ways that we can do that is by understanding what kind of limitations suppliers have in their business continuity processes. So Business continuity, as we know, deals essentially with what is a supplier or a company going to do in case of a disaster. How is it going to ensure continuity of its business? Okay. Now, we've collected business continuity data from thousands and thousands of different suppliers across tens of thousands of different sites across verticals. And some of the statistics we see are pretty scary. To read out a couple of them from here, 27% of sites do not even have BCP procedures in place. So 27%, over a quarter of sites don't even have any business continuity processes in place. So they have nothing should a disaster happen. They have nothing at all. 37% of sites are without backup power. What is one of the most common things that happens with a hurricane or a storm? Power goes out. But 37% of sites, over a third of the sites, have no way to recover from it because they have no backup power. If you knew all of this ahead of time, if you had these insights ahead of time, then you could do something about it ahead of time, right? You could focus on these suppliers with these specific problems and help them mitigate them. Why does a site not have backup power? Could be a number of different reasons. Maybe it's a really small operation that is not able to afford a generator. Maybe they have a generator, but they have not thought about stocking up on fuel. And believe me, that actually happened during Hurricane Maria. All of these things you can analyze, you can work with your supplier on and mitigate them ahead of time, right? So that is why it is so critical to collect this kind of data. Here's another set of data points that are equally alarming. If you go to the next slide, please. So at Resilinc, last hurricane season, we proactively reached out to suppliers to collect information about their hurricane preparedness. And if you look at some of the statistics here, it's again also pretty alarming. So look at the first chart on the left. The question we asked the suppliers was, do you have a satellite phone? Because, in case of a disaster, if the power lines are down and if the cell towers are down, the communication systems are down, the only way to communicate becomes a satellite phone. But 2/3 of them, nearly 2/3, 73% have no satellite phones. How could you mitigate something like this? If you think about it, we're looking at the hurricane season here. We're looking at a small subset of your suppliers who are in the region of impact, and you're looking at a subset of those who don't have satellite phones. So in the worst case, you could equip them yourself with satellite phones for the duration of the hurricane season. What about the cost of that? Think about the potential revenue impact. Think about the intelligence you could gain if they had satellite phones, and think about the cost of satellite phones compared to your annual spend. It will not come out too much, but the insurance, if you may, that it will give you against disruptions and recovery from disruptions is enormous. Take the other metric here. We found that 39%, almost 40% of suppliers had no plans to move 2 to 3 weeks of inventory out of the disaster zone, out of the hurricane region. So this is kind of really scary if you think about it. Almost 40% of suppliers who are in the hurricane region had no plans to move inventory out, no plans to safeguard your inventory should a disaster happen. If you knew this kind of information ahead of time, obviously you can take steps, right? You can work with those suppliers and you can, help them move your inventory out of the region of impact. We're not saying move a year's worth of inventory out, right? That's crazy. Move a few weeks of inventory out of the region of impact to provide that insurance, again, that safeguard that should a hurricane happen and that disruption happens, you have sufficient inventory backed up somewhere. So should that site go down, it has enough time to recover back to pre-disaster level manufacturing. And so that way you're protecting your supply chain from disruption. Okay. Hopefully that conveys the criticality of collecting information ahead of time in order to harden your supply chains. Now, what I want to do is end my section by talking about a case study. If you go to the next slide, please, of one of our customers in the pharmaceutical biotech industry that successfully coped with a Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Maria, that hit Puerto Rico back in 2017. Okay. What they were able to do is by working ahead of the hurricane, ahead of time, identifying sole and single source parts coming from Puerto Rico, and by moving inventory and by initiating a dual sourcing effort, they were able to, ensure that those patients that depended on medications that came from them, those patients were not impacted at all. Companies who did not have a robust supply chain solution like that, companies who did not plan ahead of time for hurricane season, their consequence was significantly and unfortunately different. For those companies, 69% of their patients who were dependent on medical devices or medications coming from those companies, 69% of those patients were either denied service or their service was delayed. Think about that. 69% of patients who were dependent on medications or medical equipment from these companies were either denied or delayed service. Okay, so what did this company do that was so different? So they started with analyzing which single source and sole source parts came from Puerto Rico. Using our solution, they were able to identify 30 different parts from 2 suppliers that could be impacted should the hurricane make landfall in Puerto Rico. Because they had part site mapping data available, they had this information at their fingertips. They were immediately able to execute on a dual sourcing effort. They were able to secure additional supplies ahead of the disruption happening. In fact, they secured $1.5 million worth of IV bags inventory 4 days ahead of Hurricane Maria impacting Puerto Rico. So early planning actually paid off for them. Early planning ensured that none of the patients that were dependent on their medications suffered. So this case study is a really, really powerful, proof of the value of early planning, the value of advanced planning, the value of hardening your supply chains using hyper-automation systems in order to ensure continuity of your manufacturing should a hurricane disaster happen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sandeep to walk us through the kind of technologies, processes that you need in order to successfully harden your supply chains.
Thanks, Sumit. Thanks for laying out the foundation. I think it's very important to realize that the process is important. At the same time, I think technology is very much needed and people to enable a very successful risk program. So I'm super excited today to actually go over the system itself and walk you through what various customers do to manage risks effectively. So day to day, what are the different things that they go over, and this would be a great experience for you to also visualize the different elements within the product or functionalities within the product that enable you as you prepare for your hurricane season. And the way that I want to start with is, go through a proven process time and again that customers go through and, make sure all these 3 elements are properly planned so that it is a very effective, planned out, and well executed risk program that you're running. And it all starts with gathering intelligence. And when I talk about intelligence, it's about information about your supplier network, not just your tier 1 information, as Sumit was mentioning. It's about understanding all the way up to the lower tiers, which are the suppliers you have in your supplier network. what are the different recovery capabilities of your suppliers? What are the different locations of these suppliers, not just the tier 1, but also your sub tiers? What are the different locations of these suppliers? Where are the materials being manufactured? What are the business continuity capabilities of your suppliers, and so on and so forth. So, and again, in addition to all this, you want to bring in additional aspects such as what is the financial capabilities? What is the compliance information? So all this information is really important when you think about gathering intelligence. It's kind of an ecosystem of information that you're bringing in, and which is very important for you to prioritize, the areas that you need to focus on. That actually segues into our second step here, which is, how do you prioritize? Once you have this information available on your fingertips, you want to be able to identify, where are the most important single points of failures? Where are the bottlenecks within your supplier network? You would have, hundreds and hundreds of different suppliers and materials and products that could be affected in your network. So, but you want to be able to go through that 80-20, make sure you look at the most important suppliers and prioritize in de-risking de-risking the issues that they face. And which segues into the third step, which is being able to take action. The first portion we talked about getting the data, prioritizing, but the equally important step here, and which is where experts have to focus more time, is taking the action to bring down that whole risk, which is you want to introduce your playbooks, you want to be assigning different tasks to your team members, commodity teams and procurement teams, buyers, etc., working with suppliers to de-risk or accept the risk and keep that iterative process going forward is very, very, very important here. So now that I've just set up the stage in terms of the process, what I want to do next is actually talk through some of the different functionalities and solution within the product and tie it back into this process that we just established here. So I'm going to switch back into the product right now, and I'm hoping that everyone is able to see my screen. Okay. So as soon as you log into the system, as I was talking about, so in this case, let me just put a little more background about this, what you're seeing here. This is Jupyter Technologies. It would be a customer. It's a demo environment, but it's a customer. Let's assume it's a customer, a multinational customer, which has operations and suppliers all over the world. So as soon as they log into the system, they would be able to see all that information, the information that we have gathered, the different data types, etc., right from the get-go. Now, we talked about how important the data is, which is if you take a high revenue product of yours, you want to be you want to start with your high revenue product, break down into which are the materials that go into your high revenue products, what are the different suppliers who manufacture those products, where are they located, who are their suppliers, the bill of materials of your sub tiers, and then you build that network as a result of this whole mapping, as we call the mapping exercise. And once you have that information, what you see on the map here is actually the positioning of these different suppliers, the sites, their geolocation. For instance, I have, I think, one easy example that I can quickly show you in the map itself is you start to see these different kinds of pins. And as you click on it, you can start to see this is the mapped suppliers that you have in your system. For example, the supplier, which site is it? What are the different risk components affecting that supplier? How many parts would be affected? If there are some manufacturing activities happening in that facility, you would be able to get that information as well. And in general, you would be able to see what kind of risk does it have in your supplier network. So these are different kinds of pins, your direct, indirect suppliers, your tier 1, sub-tier suppliers, etc. And the blue icons that you see here, along with the polygons, these represent the regions of impact. So as I zoom in here a little bit, and I'll be going into the details a little bit more in the next few minutes, but to just give you a quick picture, so it's actually showing you the regions of impact based on different events. So if I focus on some of the regions here towards the south part of US, you can see that repeatedly that's where the hurricanes hit, and you can see the darker red or orange colors represent the high impact zones within your supplier network. Now, once you've established the network and understanding, where are these single points of failures in your supplier network, you want to keep building that information. It is not just the mapping, but the different risk factors that add up into the overall risk of your suppliers and sites and parts and categories and so on. So one of the areas that we want to focus more about today is the hurricane preparedness itself, right? Which is your supplier actually preparing in advance for the hurricane season. So June 1st onwards, the hurricane season has started. So we have around 18 named storms planned to be, making a landfall this year. But are the suppliers ready? Are they doing enough activities to ensure that they are safeguarding your engagement with your suppliers, your customers, and so on? So collecting that information directly from the suppliers is one of the things that that would allow you to provide that information directly from the supplier. And the way that you could actually do is launch an assessment, which is a hurricane preparedness assessment through the Resilinc assessment launcher. And the screen that you're looking at is a library of different assessments which are available. So you can see from anti-corruption bribery to capacity-related assessment, cyber, to all the way up to the hurricane preparedness site assessments are available. These are stock assessments available, which experts have created, curated, and it's available ready, ready to quickly launch to your suppliers. If you want to edit some of these responses, if you want to configure the questions differently, if you want to configure the responses differently, you can immediately do it, and in 3 steps you can launch it to your suppliers. And this is actually a snippet of the assessment itself, where each question, each response, the documentation that you want to request from the suppliers, just showing you evidences of, are they actually prepared? What's your BCP documentation, etc. Everything could be configured and preset, and the assessments go to the suppliers. As soon as the suppliers start to respond and provide their information, the next step obviously is going back to our the 3-step process we talked about. That is, you want to be now prioritizing and starting to understand what are the gaps, what are the areas which are high risky. And that's where we start putting together these kind of dashboards where you have a clear visibility of what are those assessments out there which are still pending, which has been completed, within the ones which are completed, what is the risk for each and every question that you have configured, where are some of the high risk areas. For example, we talked about suppliers stating that they don't have satellite phones in I think 40% of the cases, or 40% of the sites. And this is where you would be able to get that intelligence and then completely focus or laser focus on those suppliers where there are immense gaps, as you would see. So we talked a little bit about the prioritization, which is the second aspect to it, but there are a few additional things that I would love to show you, which actually brings in that AI aspect, the different factors into picture, the millions of information data points that you have in the system, everything is taken into consideration. And the first one there that I want to talk about is the hurricane simulator, which is available in the system. The hurricane simulator is a model, it's a simulator, as the name suggests, which takes into consideration various different risk factors that could affect or impact your supply chain. And what do I mean by different factors? This could include things like, there are certain regions in the world where, hurricanes have been affected year after year. So that these are the hot zones, hot pockets, where if you have suppliers, you want to be quickly paying more attention. They have a high location risk there, so immediately taking that location aspect and the risk aspect into picture. So that's one factor. Looking at the BCP capabilities of the supplier. So through the system, suppliers have completed their business continuity assessment. What are their gaps? What are their strengths? All that information is available, but taking that into consideration in the model is another thing. Keep going, the recovery capability, which is the time to recover, as we talked about a little early. So suppliers inform saying that, hey, if a hurricane happens, it could actually take me 16 to 20 weeks to be 100% operational and back to sending in all your shipments. Whereas this is for one side, whereas for the other side it's just going to be 3 weeks. So definitely you want to be modeling the differences in these in this time to recover, and factoring and understanding which are those suppliers which have the highest recovery time, and then starting to work towards reducing the gap, or maybe it's an alternate site available that you could switch the production to. So the time to recover. The next couple of things that we look at is what's the sourcing profile of the materials that come from those sites. So are they single sourced? Are they sole sourced, multi-sourced? Are there alternate facilities where that exact materials can be manufactured or processed or tested? So that's also taken into consideration. Switching gears here, also the supplier response functionality that we also talked about a little earlier, which is as soon as an event happens, Resilinc has been notifying, for years have been notifying suppliers and customers at the same time, and collecting information directly from the suppliers, asking them, hey, are you impacted? if you are impacted, what's the situation? What's the downtime looking like? So, and suppliers provide that information back to the customers through this whole automated process, saying that yes, we are impacted by 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and the production lines are down. So all that information and the responsiveness of the suppliers, everything is calculated to model the hurricane simulator that you see here. And if you go a little to the bottom here, what you're seeing is the past hurricane. So last 11 years of hurricane information is embedded in this dashboard, and you can start seeing where are the high risky pockets where hurricanes have been repeatedly getting affected, and start prioritizing the sites that focus in that region. Now, the meat of this hurricane simulator is the outcome of the model itself, which takes into consideration the two main things. One is the impact and the vulnerability. The vulnerability is actually calculated based on the different factors that I just mentioned, which includes the location risk, to sourcing issues, to supplier confirmations, the business continuity assessment responses. All that is modeled into vulnerability. And the impact is taking into consideration what's the revenue impact, as an example, to my company. If the revenue is not something that's available, how many parts are in the region? How many sites are in the region? So with impact versus vulnerability in a scale between 1 to 10, 1 being the low risky, 10 being the highest risky, you could start seeing this 2x2 metric. And these dots that you see here, these are actually suppliers which are shown, which are highly impacted. So whichever is on the top right quadrant, you can imagine that this is where the impact is high, the vulnerability is high, and these are the suppliers that you want to be able to quickly prioritize, because you can see that their site impact is 8.57, and there could be a different set of reasons because of which the risk is really high, so that you can immediately prioritize the suppliers, sites, or categories that are important for you. One last thing is also not just showing you which part, but also providing you the reasoning and what the root causes are, etc. is very important, and providing you those suggestions. What are some of the things that you might want to do next as a result of this impact that we have identified? So in this table, let me take one example. So let's say this supplier, Avnautica Invent, is a supplier which has a site in China, Shenzhen. Looks like that specific site has been affected by 13 hurricanes in the past couple of years. The revenue impact that it provides back is around 36.2 million, is dependent on the supplier and the site, based on the different parts that are associated with the final product. And as you go to the leftmost, I think some of the reasons that you can identify here is that supplier does not have an alternate site, or there is no alternate supplier that you could switch to in case an impact happens. Similarly, the supplier doesn't have a great BCP. So these are some of these factors that I brought into the front so that you can quickly take action. And the suggestions here are, maybe you want to quickly check into what are the capabilities from a business continuity standpoint. From the inventory standpoint, do you have enough safety stock? What's in work in progress? Do you want to switch, thinking about moving to a temporary location, some of the inventory? Supplier impact confirmation. So you want to be having that open line of communication with suppliers which are in the region. So establishing SLAs and letting them know, hey, we want to make sure you are able to communicate back to us as soon as a hurricane happens. Maybe someone from another part of the world who is connected with their crisis team, they could respond to us. So establishing those kind of protocols is some of the suggestions based on the condition that we just discussed here. So this is the hurricane simulator. Now, an extension of this is, what if you are able to create scenarios or model scenarios from the past learnings that you have? So that's where the what if simulation tools becomes really, really, really powerful, where you can actually simulate conditions, scenarios based on the supply chain mapping that you have done. So the map that you see here and the different clusters that you see here are the sites based on the mapping that you've done, which is tier 1 all the way up to their sub tiers. And you can actually create scenarios by just drawing a polygon. Let's say if there's a certain region that you're more focused, we know that the southern part of US is more likely to be impacted during hurricane season. You can model that and understand what the impact is. Let's say if there is a supplier which is has confirmed an impact, you can quickly model it based on a supplier or a bunch of suppliers. Or if it's a circle, let's say if it's an earthquake. In fact, today morning in the Bay Area we had an earthquake 4.1 early morning. But in such situations like these where there's an earthquake, and if it's a massive scale, you can quickly simulate the location and the epicenter, and then understand what's the impact potential in the ripple effect that's going to happen. But what I think is even more valuable is the different scenarios that we have already stocked and loaded up for you and our customers, which is you can start seeing all the past different hurricanes and storms and typhoons that have occurred over the years. So from Hurricane Ida to Irma to Maria to Gonu to Goni, and every different types of hurricanes that have impacted in the past, you could actually model them based on the mapping that you've done today. Maybe you did not do your mapping at that point in time and you were not completely aware of where your sub-tiers are and how your network was built out, but this would be a right time for you to go back, understand what if another Maria were to hit, and if it affects the Puerto Rico region, what would be the effects to my supply chain. And in the example that I have, I've actually recreated the Hurricane Maria example. So Hurricane Maria, which actually affected the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico region, automatically the polygons get created. And as you go to the details, you'll start to see that it has 30 different sites, supplier sites, or your manufacturing sites in the region. 28 different products are dependent on materials that are sourced from that region, 239 parts which are manufactured by sites in the region. And very importantly, the suppliers have informed you that it would take usually 24 weeks on an average to bring back to 100% operational, or you have an option to switch the production to a completely different facility which is outside the region of impact, and it could at least take 7 weeks. So this is this is information that you could quickly look at, and as you go into the details, you could see the breakdown of which are the sites, what are the parts manufactured by each and every site, what are the different activities from manufacturing, distribution, wafer fab, all those different activities you can pinpoint, breakdown of the materials, the latest contact information of suppliers, and so on and so forth. And of course, everything is downloadable. And the way that the customers use the what if scenario planner is they go through these scenarios, create their playbook. So they have a playbook for, let's say, the hurricanes which are affecting the US region, hurricanes that affect the Asia region. So all these different playbooks are created in advance to proactively manage any disruptions. Now, we talked a little bit about the simulation as well as the scenario builder. Now let's switch gears a little bit to, what if a real event is now going to happen. So this is one of the events you can see, which is Hurricane Laura, which impacted last year, 2020. And as soon as the information is out there in the social media or in the news that hey, there's a hurricane expected to make a landfall in the next few days, the Resilinc AI system and the research team starts to analyze the impact, understands how this could affect the industry that you're in, the customers, from a customer perspective, what would be the impact to your supply chain, and quickly you would be notified saying that, hey, this is what the impact is estimated to be, and a virtual war room is created which would have all the information that is necessary for you to take that quick prioritization, identification, all the steps that we talked about, and focus more on the mitigation activities. So to talk a little bit about the war room itself, you can see that there's it looks like in this case it's actually a 6th update that we had sent. So maybe as the hurricane changes its path on real time, close to near time, real time, we send these updates saying that hey, the hurricane just changed its path. So you get that commentary going on. If you want to go into the details of the information, you can go through it. You get a summary of what the event is: 44 partners, 30 sub-tier suppliers, 82 sites, a revenue impact of a really significant number that could be affected if this is a really, really important, very high impact event if it makes a landfall. So proactively, you get all the region of impact, any material that flows out of that sites in the region, you get to see that material flow, which is from the site of your supplier. It might be going to one of your facilities in another part of the world. You could track which material is actually dependent on which site and so on through the material flow. And as you go to the details, you could then see the breakdown of the suppliers, sites, parts, and so on. And then you could quickly identify the highest impacted supplier. So in the supplier table, which lists all the 54 different suppliers that are potentially affected, I briefly mentioned about the automated response that goes out, or questions that goes out to the suppliers asking them, hey, are you impacted? What's the downtime? Are you all secure? So in this case, the suppliers respond back, and it's captured for our customers to quickly identify, which suppliers out of the 54, who has confirmed that they are not impacted, which of them have not responded. So in this example, you can see that 2 suppliers, AFIConnect and TECCon, they have responded saying that they are 4 weeks down or estimating 12 weeks of downtime, and it's because their production lines might be affected due to this storm, which has already made a landfall. So you'd be able to quickly understand what the impact is. Now, if you take a step even further, thinking about more from a transactional standpoint, when events happen, there's so much of impact to the purchase orders. You're dependent on these materials being shipped and delivered to you. So impacts are time and again, we have seen that purchase orders get delayed as a result of all these different events happening. And this is where the AI/ML predictive, purchase order delay system, which is an AI/ML model, is brought into picture. And it starts to look at the event, look at the suppliers in the region, look at the past purchase orders of the customer, so years and years of purchase order informations, which purchase orders have been delayed in the past, when was it, the estimated time of arrival, but why was it delayed, what are the different events that have affected the purchase order. So all that different factors are taken into consideration, and the model provides an outcome or an output which says, hey, for this event, there is a likelihood that there's 6 to 17 weeks of delay for the purchase orders that are right there being processed as we speak. So it starts off with all those model outputs showing 6 to 17 weeks of delay for the purchase order. So the obvious question is, which are those purchase orders that I'm dependent on from those suppliers from the region? So as you go to the details of the suppliers, you could start to see all those information about the PO. Once I click on it, you can see the list of all the different purchase orders. When was it expected to be arrived? What's the schedule line? What's the current impact status? And the probable weeks delay. This is the output of the model after crunching years and years and years of information from the PO perspective, from the events perspective, the suppliers, KPIs, all that put together. So in this example, you can see that the purchase order delay is 6 weeks. And the system is a self-learning system. So in this case, looks like the buyer has gone ahead and checked with the supplier, asking if, are you impacted? Do you anticipate any kind of impact? Looks like the supplier has confirmed that it's a 4-week delay. The user in this case can actually feed the input back into the system, and the model keeps learning to get to that 99% accuracy as we speak. So it's a completely feedback driven, user focused model that's providing you information on which POs would be affected. We are running short of time, so 2 more quick things that I want to definitely cover is one, of course, the collaboration center is embedded here, which is you want to be interacting with suppliers back and forth and your internal team. So here you would be able to bring all your team members, different teams from finance to IT to security and all the suppliers, everything. You could have that constant collaboration happening. And of course, the action piece that we talked about, which is you want to be in mitigating the risk out there. So it is connected to our workflow system, where as soon as you initiate any kind of tasks, you would be able to, as Sumit was mentioning, all your different playbooks based on various scenarios can be onboarded to the workflow center. And let's say in this case, my activity is to find an alternate source. So the different set of actions are pre-built. The playbook is already loaded. I know exactly who the owners are. And I would just select the supplier here, which in fact, one of the supplier which is confirmed is Affy Connect. So I would select the supplier and launch the task to my internal team members so that they get notified, they start working towards reducing the risks which is out there due to the hurricane that's out there. And of course, there are dashboards which give you a heads up on what are the latest status and which team member is working on which project, which tasks, which of them have already passed due, what are the critical items, and so on and so forth. So with that said, let me go back really quick to the presentation itself now, and talk a little bit about, re-emphasizing some of the best practices that we went through today and what our customers have successfully implemented, which has helped them to, prepare for this hurricane season. Number one, you want to start looking into, of course, mapping is very important. Start with your mapping, and at the same time, start looking into your high vulnerable suppliers, sites, categories. Take those high impact products of yours and start looking at which are the most important suppliers that I should take a look at. And you could use the what if simulation, the hurricane simulator, these different kinds of, prioritization aspects within the product to help you get there. Once you identify these suppliers and sites and parts and categories, you want to start looking into has the supplier provided a business continuity plan? What is the safety stock looking like? Do I need to move the inventory out of a different region based on recurring impacts to that region? then going back to the suppliers itself, right? Which is you want to be having that open communication, collaboration with your suppliers to ensure they provide you information on what's happening. Are they actually doing something to secure the inventory? So establishing SLAs and protocols in terms of working with your suppliers is very important this time. Now, as you focus and you understood that these are the sites which are highly critical, you want to be getting that information directly from the supplier that yes, they are doing something, or no, we don't have a satellite. So that's where launching a hurricane preparedness survey would be an ideal next step. And at the same time, I think what is very important is having the leadership buy-in here. So right from the top, making sure that a communication goes out to your suppliers, and the snippet that you see at the bottom is actually an email that has gone to the suppliers from the executive saying that, hey, we need to make sure we are working together. We want to get your latest information. Please provide us the hurricane preparedness capabilities that you have. So ensuring there's a buy-in right from the top all the way to the bottom, I think that's very important. Another big thing is tabletop exercises, doing it internally, externally with a few suppliers. Maybe you could just take 3 critical suppliers and doing a tabletop exercise with them. And of course, everything together, have proper documentation and playbooks in advance, so that as soon as you hear about another hurricane, you just need to initiate that playbook, and there you go. Your steps are seamless, and you're acting on the mitigation effort more than just looking at the data. So with that said, I want to I know we have very less time, but Melissa, I want to hand it over to you and see if we could address 1 or 2 questions in the time we have.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sandeep, and Sumit as well for your overview earlier. And again, in the interest of time, I think we can probably tackle 1 or 2 now. And if we don't get to your question, we will certainly note them and follow up with you later today. So first question was related to how long does it typically take to send and receive those hurricane assessments to suppliers?
Yeah, sure. So I can take this up. So in general, so one of the things that we do really well, I think we have been working with suppliers for a very long time, that we have established this connection. Suppliers know what the goal of the program is, why is this being requested by customers, so that that relationship is the main important thing, which over the years we have established with customers and suppliers together. Coming down to the exact question on hurricane preparedness itself, this is a very carefully curated set of questions. It's not like 50 to 80 set of questions. The one that we have is like 10 to 15 questions where the crisis manager could quickly knock off and give information about what are their capabilities, etc. What we have seen over the last couple of years when we have launched the hurricane assessment is, believe it or not, within 48 hours, we have seen 80% of suppliers providing back the responses saying that, hey, this is what our plan is, this is how we are trying to tackle, and it's much more seamless communication as a result of it.
Super, thanks so much. And then kind of follow up to that, is this available to all Resilinc customers on regular accounts, or is there an add-on fee specifically for the simulator?
Go ahead, Sandeep.
No, go for it, Sumit.
Yeah, so the hurricane simulator and the what if scenario planning tools are actually included in all of the offerings that we have. So if you're an existing Resilinc customer, you should already have access to it.
Super, thanks so much. And I think, just again, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Again, if we didn't get to your question, we will certainly follow up with you later today. I want to thank you, Sumit and Sandeep, and for our audience for attending today. We'll be sending out links to the recording and the presentation deck, so please be on the lookout for that. We're also going to be posting a recap on our blog in the next week or so. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and take care, and we will catch you on the next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.